The presentation I'm going to give you now is kind of a condensed version of a presentation that I literally do all around the world. And the topic is a little bit different from what we've heard earlier. I'm really going to be talking about the opportunities inherent in understanding how the weather impacts each and every one of us every day, and the opportunities inherent in the technologies that we have in front of us to be able to actually leverage that information as business insight and intelligence. 40 years ago, I just realized this, Amy, as I was coming over here. 40 years ago this month, I joined the U.S. Air Force. I was 17 years old, grew up in Marin County, California, took an aptitude test to go in the services right out of high school. And for some reason, I had an aptitude to either be a fireman or be a weatherman. And I had a friend who was a fireman in the Air Force, and he said all they ever did was wash trucks. So my second choice was what I went with, and I became a weather observer and then a weather forecaster, and I ended up spending 20 years in the Air Force and in the Army as a weather forecaster, working with decision makers. The reason that it's relevant to what I'm doing today and what I've been doing for the last 20 years is that in the military, weather information is used very specifically as an input into making decisions, both tactical and strategic. And so what I learned in the Air Force and in the Army was how to leverage weather data, convert it into insights and intelligence, integrate it into operational planning, and use it literally on the battlefield. Now this photo, this is actually somewhere in Iraq. This was just after the first Gulf War, and the guy with the circle, the red circle around his head with the steel pot on his head is me. And you may not notice from this picture, but many of us are wearing plastic trash bags. And behind us is a flooded wadi. This evening over beers, if anybody's got any questions or would like to know the full story, I can give it to you, but I don't have time to give you the full story. But the reality is this is where I sort of learned my bones in terms of how to use weather from an intelligence perspective, and how to integrate it. When I left the Air Force 20 years ago, I joined a company that was doing the same kind of work for large retailers and large consumer packaged good companies to create weather and data, leverage that weather data, create an analytic, and then use that to optimize planning. So for the last 20 years, I've had this sort of weird, unique, although actually pretty valuable experience now in terms of using weather data in a way that was very proactive, very military-like, but it was really geared towards creating more resilient and more profitable businesses. My next slide is actually going to be a video. And the reason it's a video is I want to give you an overview, quick overview of the weather company, how we've sort of changed the weather company, and what that will mean in terms of our ability to do what I used to do in the Air Force 20 years ago and bring those competencies and scale those competencies around the world, literally, for many, many different industries. So let's see if, okay. About 6 years ago, I joined the Weather Channel companies, and I was hired specifically to help create sort of an analytical business where they could leverage the weather data to create applications that would help businesses, much in the same way I did in the military and much in the same way I did when I left the military and joined a startup in Philadelphia. And what we were doing 6 years ago is we were working to transform the Weather Channel. Of course, the Weather Channel is a media company. What our leadership at the time sort of very wisely recognized was the fact that the way people were consuming weather information and how people were using weather information was changing in a transformative way. People were no longer watching television, they're getting information from a mobile phone. So we knew that we needed to make a weather forecast that was extremely precise, and by precise I mean geographically precise. We needed to create a weather forecast that was as accurate as possible, meaning it had a rapid refresh rate, was bringing in as much new information as possible, and it was scalable to the extent that we could push that weather forecast out to literally tens of millions, actually hundreds of millions of mobile phones all around the world. So in effect, what happened was we changed the company from being a media company that had data to a data and analytics company that also had a media platform. And as a result of that, over time, we built a pretty robust, initially advertising technology that enabled us to leverage this kind of data to create really cool advertising. I'll talk about that in just a second. And then also we became very interesting to IBM. And hence now I am a part of IBM's Global Business Services, traveling all around the world talking about the same kind of things that I'm talking about now. One of the reasons that the weather is so important to businesses is the fact that the way the weather impacts each and every one of us in this room is sort of fundamental to the way that we all live our lives. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, now one of the things when I was in the service for 20 years, I went to school at night. So I started at 17, right out of high school. By the time I got done, I had a master's degree. One of the things that I always remembered when I took my night courses was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Little did I know that I'd be sort of talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the next 20 years and beyond. And the reason I'm talking about it is because the effect that weather has on all of us is a primary driver of the way that we behave every single day. When we wake up in the morning, we check the weather forecast. Halfway through the day, we'll check the weather forecast. On Friday or Thursday or Friday, we'll check the weather forecast, and that sort of shapes all of our activities. It even shapes, the actual weather shapes our moods and how we feel. So it's a fundamental and measurable driver of how each and every one of us are living our lives every day. And because of that, because of the fact that it's measurable, and we can measure how the weather's going to shape what we're going to be wanting to buy or what we're going to be wanting to do, and because we can overlay on that measurement of forecast, we can now use the weather data as a predictor of what people are going to be wanting and needing, and that becomes really interesting for a lot of different reasons. This is another video that I used, and I'll just talk you through this. This is Jim Cantori, who's a former colleague of mine. He's a friend. Jim is in the world of weather in the U.S. He's kind of like Elvis. So everywhere, when Jim Cantori shows up, people see Jim Cantori and they think really, really bad things are going to happen. This video is really funny, trust me. He shows up, it's called Cantori Goes on Vacation. He goes to the beach and all of a sudden there's a run on the grocery store and people are buying all the bread and milk. And there's Jaws music, it's really awesome.
Everybody can use a vacation, but sharing it with the Weather Channel's Jim Cantori can be a little unnerving. Look, we get it. Usually when Jim shows up, bad weather isn't far behind. But can't the guy get a break when he's on a break?
Every vacation.
Catch the Weather Channel's Jim Cantori all summer long. Just hopefully not on your beach.
That reaction happens every single day. It's sort of muscle memory. We're looking at the weather, we're using that to plan our day, we're not thinking about it, but because the weather forecasts are ubiquitous, because we all have a mobile phone that's giving us a weather forecast, and because most of the time that weather forecast is right, it's wrong once in a while, but by far, 90% of the time it's right, we just by default plan our lives around that, which makes that weather forecast, again, when you can align it with data, when you can align it with cognition, you can get a really interesting and really powerful and really important view into what people are going to be wanting and needing into the future. That's really good for business. It's also really good for all of us, because to the extent that both businesses and government can anticipate what you're going to be wanting and needing over the next day, weeks, they can be better responsive in terms of providing the services and the goods that people need. Now this is actually an iconic photo. This is Eisenhower sort of wishing the troops off to as part of the D-Day landing. This was, the reason I like to use this image is because when I was in the Gulf War, that initial photo I showed you, I was with the 101st Airborne Division. So this is actually the 101st Airborne Division. The reason this ties back to what I've been talking about in terms of using weather as a tactical and strategic aid is that the timing of the D-Day landing was based very much on the weather forecast that we would have optimal conditions to be able to make that invasion on that day. The Germans didn't think the weather was going to be good enough, so this was literally the most famous weather forecast in the history of warfare. And it's also, I think, a really good example of how leveraging this kind of insight and leveraging it in a way where it basically fits into the way that a business or a government can plan and execute their business enables a business or a government to be more resilient and to be more responsive and to be more adaptive to the needs of the people that are either in the community or customers. Last video, another really awesome one. This really speaks to the reason that IBM acquired the weather company. And it's because IBM has been moving and transforming into a company that is very heavily into the application and integration of many, many different types of data and cognition. And they realize that the influence of weather, all those things I just talked about, is ubiquitous. It has impacts on government, it has impacts on every different sort of industry sector, and the impact is global.
It started as an idea.
And good evening, America. Welcome to the Weather Channel, the non-ending weather telethon.
Deliver the most accurate forecast when you need it most.
Our goal tonight, keep you safe.
First we were here.
Today, the top winds are up to 105 miles an hour.
Then here. And here. Today, we're powering the world around us in ways you can see and ways you can only feel. And now, we're about to transform our business again.
Hello, my name is Watson, and I'm here to help.
The biggest thing in weather just became the next big thing in cognitive computing.
The weather is the most pervasive source of data there is. It's why the IBM company acquired the weather company. Wearables, sensors, cars, data everywhere. 9 billion connected devices, 2.5 quadrillion bytes of data a day. The challenge is understanding it.
We're providing insight for the everyday and the extraordinary.
Now we're going to combine weather with all your operational data, telematics, sensors, and you can start to see what you could do for insurance risks, for retail demand, for auto safety.
Yet in the midst of unprecedented change, our mission remains the same: to deliver information to people at the moments that matter most. We'll just be doing it in ways no one ever imagined.
So I believe it'll change not only what you make, it'll change how you operate, and in fact, it'll actually change who you are. I believe every decision mankind makes is going to be better because of these technologies.
And so with the acquisition of the weather company, which is literally the largest weather company in the world, by IBM, which is one of the largest corporations in the world. All of a sudden, this work that I've been doing for the last 20 years in sort of a company by company basis has scaled in an enormous way. So there are literally tens of thousands of IBM sellers and consultants all around the world that are sending the same exact message that I'm sending right now. Weather information tied to analytics, integrated into systems, can create businesses and governments that are more resilient and more responsive. So it's tied back to climate, but it's more real time, because the weather impact on all of us is happening right now. And because of the fact that many of us have mobile phones and that many of us are living in areas that are more exposed, this is not a problem of 30 or 40 years from now. This is a challenge today. By using information like this, by leveraging technology and cognition, this is a way for businesses, and I keep going back to the business paradigm, but largely that's because that's where I spend most of my life in my world, is talking to large businesses. But what happens is, if you're able to leverage data like this, you can start to do things right now whereby you're serving your customer better and you're also serving your shareholders better. And this isn't something that you have to wait 10 years to do. This is something you could do this quarter, this year. This example is a marketing example that we did some years ago. It was actually with Pantene and Walgreens. Pantene, it was part of the P&G, and Pantene was the brand. We did analytics against the shampoo to measure what kind of weather created a bad hair day, literally, using different kinds of shampoo. So we're able to measure and monitor the weather conditions and actually detect when the weather was going to be driving a bad hair day. And then we use location technologies in our mobile platform to magically serve up an advertisement at exactly the right time with exactly the right message. And it was tremendously successful. You saw they had, 24% year-over-year sales. What was more important, which I thought was pretty cool, was that the Wall Street Journal actually did an article on it. And they interviewed me, and they interviewed a colleague of mine, and she went, her name is Katie Rossman, she's now with the New York Times. She went on Twitter to see if anybody had interacted and commented on this ad, and I'll be darned if she didn't find somebody. And she called her and asked her what she thought about it. The reason she found her on Twitter was she tweeted out something to the effect of, "I can't believe they know I need this exact kind of shampoo right now." So she interviewed her, and she basically said, "It was the most amazing thing. I was having a bad hair day, and all of a sudden this ad popped up with a coupon for Walgreens, and directions to the nearest Walgreens. And it wasn't creepy. And the reason it wasn't creepy, even though it was like incredibly precise and sort of relevant, it wasn't creepy because she didn't put any personal information into her phone. She just put her zip code in. But we had done the math to understand how the weather, in this case was New York City, would impact the people's hair based on prior sales for that shampoo, and inserted the ad at exactly that right time. And then finally, work that we're doing now with insurance companies, where we're mining weather radar data, Doppler weather radar data. We can identify on that radar where large hail is falling. Basically, we use dead reckoning, and so we see where that hail is going to go over the next 20 or 30 minutes. We work with many large insurance companies here in the US in a white label way. They have an application that will then send you, if it happens to be coming to your house, you'll get a text message with an urgent text. So it's not one of these spam things that you get all the time. It'll be something to the effect of, "For God's sakes, put your car in the garage, because there's some bad stuff coming." And those kind of urgent, maybe once a year or once every 2-year alerts, have a really meaningful impact in terms of getting people to get off their ass and move their car. And by enabling people to avoid the loss to their car, obviously they're going to save the cost of having to repair the car. But more importantly, they've sort of, just like with the Pantene ad, they've sort of transformed the way that they are advertising to their customers. So they're no longer advertising them, they're providing them advice and guidance and help. And their customers are responding to it that way. So when I use the term rethinking weather, and I'm giving this presentation all over the world, that's really what I mean in terms of rethinking weather. It's, let's think differently about how we can leverage the tools that we have, the technologies that we have, using artificial intelligence and cognition, which is really going to change the game. Let's integrate those insights into our systems so that we can better serve both our customers and our constituents, so that we can be more resilient in terms of our ability to serve our customers and our shareholders as well. Because to the extent that you're able to save 50% of the cost that you would normally pick up in terms of repairing cars, that goes right back to your shareholders. And it's real time, it's right now. So with that, I think I'm over, 146 over. All right, thank you.